over and over and over. So we made all the faces and we did the special voices that go with that. And then we sang 3 songs. We sang In the Dark of the Midnight, and There Is a Place of Quiet Rest, and then the Disney song. And they all sang along, and it was a special time because it gave them security and they knew they were loved. And it was a bonding time where we spent, oh my goodness, sometimes the going to bed time stretched out to be over an hour. And that's okay too, because it was the close time. And when it was time for Papa to go out and shut out the light, they were ready to go to sleep. So it's something that probably started the whole procedure, because from then on, my wife, who also taught school at the time, would read to them and read to them and read and read. And we'd hold them on our lap and read some more and read some more. It got to the point where when they were crawling around the house or running around, they had a book in their hand, saying those little flimsy children's books that are available. And they got so dog-eared and chewed on and torn apart and crayons written on them and everything. And that was what they're for. And as a result, of course, besides the bonding time that we had, they got used to books. And that's a terrific thing, because they developed a comfort zone with books. They developed speed reading. They developed reading comprehension. And it was a fun time. You know, a lot of times they knew the books so well, the ones that they picked out, that I would slip in a different word. I would have a purple gorilla jump out of a tree right out of the middle of the page. And they would look at me and hit me in the arm and say, "Papa, that's not right." You know, and it was a fun time. So they learned at a very early age to appreciate books. And that led one thing to another and one thing to another. So as they got into elementary and up into the upper grades, they learned to excel. And they had such a comfort zone with books. And of course, as you may guess, we incorporated Bible stories and Bible verses and you know, mixed that whole thing through with it. So it was kind of fun doing it. And now that we have grandkids, of course, we started the whole thing. The youngest grandkid is already 9. So still love the old stories. So back in 2018 and 2019, I started writing a book. It's called My New Buddy, and it's a romance of all things. Who'd ever think old Pop would write a romance? It's a scary thought. But
you're the expert on the subject, aren't you?
Well, maybe, you know, after 45 years of marriage, you know.
In your day, maybe, yeah.
I know it. But we did. I wrote it's written in the first person, and I wanted to do that to really make it as visual as I could. So I started writing New Buddy, and it's about an old guy. Imagine that. An old guy who has a lot of heart problems, a lot of dizzy spells, because I kind of understood that. I could write that just word for word per experience. And he meets this lovely lady who also has health issues. And that's part of the romance part of the book. But that's not the story. The story is about an 8-year-old boy. And that's why it's called A New Buddy. And the 8-year-old boy kind of carries the story because he does all the things that my grandkids do. You know, they come up with the silliest expressions and these funny little dances. And in order to be a buddy, you have to have a secret code, and you have to have some special little steps, and you have to misspell words and missay, you know, expressions and stuff like that. So all through the book, he's doing all these comical things. And so as the story progresses, of course, this old man and the young boy and the lady, they develop this friendship. And that's what really the story of the book is. And there's one more, because the little boy says, "Well, if you don't know something, my mom says to ask Jesus." And that he uses that line over and over and over in the book. And so the 4 of them, they go have ice cream and they have all the adventures, but it's always the 4 of them because they always include Jesus wherever they go. And that's kind of how the story is written, and that's how it ends up.
Now, how long have you been writing on this, Terry?
Since 2018.
2018. And what are you going? Are you done?
Well, I had a lady that a lot of you know from Texas, Diane Gates. She edited a whole bunch of it, and it's kind of like close. I'll say that. So if it ever is ready, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's there, and I put a surprise ending on because as a nutritionist for 20 some years, I also did animal feed sales for Purina Mills, and I always learned at the end of a presentation to ask for the order, because in sales, that's what you had to do. So at the end of this book, I wrote an extra little sub-chapter at the end of the book, and I pretended I was in my office writing, and all the characters of the book knocked on the door and walked into the office. And they said, wait a minute, we can't end this book without telling all the people how to accept Jesus. And they go through verse after verse after verse, and that's asking for the order. Because if you present Jesus in practical ways throughout the book, why wouldn't you ask for the order? And that's that's how the book ends, asking for the order.
Now, you said you were a nutritionist with Purina Mills, something like that?
Yes.
And I learned a story Zig Ziglar told about the nutritionists and the marketing people got a little bit more influence in the company than perhaps was warranted. And they came out with this new dog food. And of course, they got all the sales reps coming in and all the, people that represent, anyway. And they start telling everybody about how nutritionally balanced it is and all the science that's gone into it. And then the marketing people got up and said they did their focus groups and the packaging and the quantities and everything is just right. But the product didn't sell very well. And the CEO was very confused. So he called a meeting and had the nutritionist and the marketing people come in, and and his assistant raised his hand and said, well, actually, sir, the dogs just don't like the stuff. But isn't that the way it goes? The things that are good for us, sometimes we don't like.
That's right. Exactly right. When I was a nutritionist, you go onto a dairy farm, and one of the first things you do is besides greeting the farmer or his wife or the kids or the dog or whatever else, you take and look at the cows. One of the very first things you do. And you walk up and down the aisles, and you're quiet, and you just watch and listen, see what they're telling you. Because if cows are sick, they'll let you know. And if they're well, they'll let you know that too. So much you can tell by just looking at the cows and listening. Then you go out back and look at the feeds, see everything that is going into their daily ration. And after you do this hundreds and hundreds of times, you know what looks normal, but you also know what doesn't look normal, see? And so I could go into a place and say, well, here is this problem and here's that problem. And every time you do a nutrition ration, you do it 5 times. Because you have to make sure the energy fiber ration is right, enough protein, enough energy, and make sure the minerals all right. It's quite an involved thing. So if you don't get it right, the cows will tell you that too. So it was a fun experience all those 20 years, but it taught me a lot about making the right presentation and remembering to ask for the order.
Terry, where did you come into all this knowledge about nutrition for livestock?
Well, I grew up on the farm, so we ended up with hogs and beef, and everybody around us was dairy. So I ended up milking cows and feeding cows, and one thing led to another, and you start taking classes, and all about nutrition. I guess that's what the good Lord wanted me to do. And the one thing I found along the way, and JD knows this if he's down there from Texas, that farm folks are some of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and I can go back to Wisconsin now, in central Wisconsin, and drive onto a farm, and we have wonderful friendships that have lasted all these years. And it's a wonderful thing, because now you see their kids, of course, but the farms are still there, and the cows come and go, but the bull stays forever, that joke. But it's so fun to have that kind of a legacy and be able to incorporate that into stories. Those people who follow me on Facebook will notice that I put a lot of devotionals out there, and it has a lot to do with uh, what's the right word? Taking time with the grandkids,
Hmm.
and that's where the little boy in my book, my new buddy, a lot of those things that he comes up with are what the grandkids did over all these years, and our two daughters as well. And stopping, and when I take a walk with them, stopping with them and listening, watching them, seeing what's right, seeing what isn't right, because they'll tell you. And you have to just observe and spend time with them and kind of feel yourself with who they are and what they're doing rather than saying, hey, you're going to go for a walk with Papa. It's the other way around. How about if I go for a walk with you?
Hmm.
And so sometimes when I'm going for a walk, like uh, our youngest granddaughter, who's 9 years old, we went down to the Mississippi River and we fed the ducks and the geese and the swans. And we found that if you are really quiet and you have a whole bag of dry corn with you, you spread that out along the snow on the river, and the swans and the geese and the ducks, they'll come swarming right over and gobble up that corn, and they'll forget that you're standing there, and they'll come right over. We got to within about 4 or 5 feet of the swans, and they're a beautiful white bird with those big black feet and black bill. And my 9-year-old granddaughter was thrilled. I mean, can you imagine being 4 or 5 feet away from a wild swan? How big they are. So it's experiences like that help her build character. And so we get to be buddies as we go through that. We'll go hand in hand, and she can ask me anything, and she knows that, and that's kind of where all that pre-selling went into when they were infants. And you teach them to read, and you snuggle them up on your lap, and it's a wonderful time, and you become buddies. And so later on, when they're 9 and 10 years old, when you're out for a walk, and all of a sudden everything stops, and then you kind of go like, "Uh-oh, now what's going on?" And they'll look at you and they'll lay out a question of life, or about Jesus, or about families, or whatever, and then they'll look at you, and you got to have the answer, you know. And God be praised, it's amazing how the Lord will give me an answer. But that's a special time. I mean, a special time when they're infants reading to them, but when they have your trust and they're 10 years old and some kid at school got to be a problem, they can talk to you about it just right out of the blue. And it's a fascinating thing. That granddaughter I was talking about, who does the opera singing, she also is going to graduate with honors. And she was so thrilled about reading about nurses, reading about doctors, reading about medicine, all that stuff. Now she's going to go into pre-med and try to be a pediatric doctor.
Hmm.
So I'm thrilled with that. I mean, I don't have anything to do with that except all the reading and the buddy time that we spent as those kids were growing up, and poured ourselves into those kids and prayed for them and just tried to be their buddy all the way through. So even now, even though she's 18 now, she says, "Papa, I'm 18 now and I'm a grown woman," and tries to be that independent spirit. But she comes over and gives me a great big hug and says, "Oh, I love you, Papa." See, and that's the neat thing. And if I could impress anybody, anything on who's watching this post, is if you invest in your children or in your grandchildren with things that like Proverbs will tell you to do, and teach them about wisdom, and teach them about knowledge and how to find knowledge in the Bible, teach them about understanding, teach them about discernment, like Proverbs talks about. If you can show them in your life, and by being a buddy and walking with them hand in hand, and actually act that out for them. Then when they get up to be seniors in high school, like our granddaughter is, they make those better choices in life. And that's my advice to all the young married couples who are going to have children, and for the moms and dads and uncles and aunts and all the grandparents. Go ahead and take an evening time and pour a story into those kids. Don't be afraid to sing a song. I mean, if old grandpa here can croak out an old song, my goodness, anybody can do it. And it's an investment that'll return itself over and over and over and over.
Terry,
That's how the parts play together.
Terry, do your grandchildren call you Old Papa?
Yep, they do.
And where did that Old Papa moniker come from?
That's a really good question. Somewhere along the line, I went from being dad to being papa to being old papa. I'm not sure where it came along.
I thought it may have been the name of the plane you flew in World War II.
Well, I think, see, one of the original stories that I started with the kids was when they were real infants. Of course, they believe anything. So I told them, "Oh yeah, Papa, I'm 300 years old because I grew up with Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox and Daisy the Four-Quartered Cow," and told them all kinds of the most fanciful stories you've ever heard in your life. And they would go home and tell their mom and dad, "Papa told us this." And boy, I got a phone call, and it was the most hilarious thing you've ever seen. I'll give you an example of that. I hope we have time. I took them to the Dairy Queen, which is where we lived at the time, about 4 or 5 blocks away. And here they are. The oldest one was, well, the youngest one was still a toddler, so they were probably, the oldest one was maybe 5 or 6. So we went the long way around. That means when we take the dog on a leash and we walk through the park first, and we walk down by the railroad tracks and eventually end up by the Dairy Queen type of a deli thing. And so I bought them each a chocolate malt. And that was their first time they ever had a chocolate malt. So they took a great big spoon or a sip of that and they said, "Oh, Papa, this is wonderful. We just love this. What is it?" And without even thinking, I said, "Oh, well, that's gunk." And so as we walked home and they had their chocolate malt, they said, "Oh, Papa, we love gunk. This is the best gunk. Oh, this is wonderful." And so when they got home, of course, first thing they did was, "Papa gave us gunk. It was wonderful. Oh, we love gunk. Would you get us some gunk too?" So my daughter, of course, had to call me up and say, "Okay, what's gunk?" So I waited and kind of waited and put her on the leash a little bit. I said, "Okay, I'll tell you, it's just a chocolate malt." But we had so much fun. Don't tell them it's a chocolate malt. So when they visited the next time, what's the first thing you think they said?
They wanted
"Papa,
some.
take us down to the shop. We're going to call that the gunk shop. That's where we get gunk."
The best gunk in town. Gunk is actually a brand name of a degreasing compound used to clean engines.
I know it.
So you
Think of that at the time.
don't let them into the automotive section. They might see some gunk and put it in a cup, or
That's one of those things you think about afterwards,
Yeah.
But at the moment, it was too fun to go with.
Yeah, you just go with what came out, and that's what came out.
Yeah.
So Old Papa is not. When is the first occasion that you remembered being called or referring to yourself as Old Papa?
It was when I was writing my devotionals that you see on Facebook. Was there was somebody else named Terry? I got to think. It's probably a couple years ago.
Okay.
I just started saying "Old Papa."
Okay, so this is a rather new thing. This is not your old friends from high school. Well, they're probably dead because you're old. They.
I am 360 some years old, so they're probably all gone.
What did you think when God made dirt? You were there, right? You were there.
It's just hilarious because when we have the grandkids over and we have a meal together or whatever, the tradition is after the meal and things are picked up, then one of the kids will look at me and say, Papa, Papa, come on, tell us a Paul Bunyan story. And away we go, and they participate in it. I'll get halfway through and I'll stop and say, what happened next? What do you think? What should happen next? And away the kids go. It's so fun to do.
Do you know anywhere you can still get chocolate malt? I know you can get chocolate milkshake, but malt is something that we'd go down to the drugstore, with the little stools, the red stools, and and they had that little blender thing that they stuck. That's got a little stem, and when they got done, they'd scoop that malt in there out of a stainless steel container.
Yeah,
I don't know what that stuff is, but it sure is good.
You can probably get it online. You can get anything online, but wow, that was awesome stuff. Cold ice cream, chocolate malt. Oh man, of course. It's not really chocolate ice cream. It's gunk,
Well, and most of what we buy today that is referred to as milk has just enough milk in it to be called milk, But my father used to, they'd have to shake the milk up because the cream would float to the top, and they'd get in trouble because they'd like to scoop that cream off the top. And when I went to Holland, we were getting breakfast and they bring milk for the cereal. That stuff pours about with the consistency of honey. Yeah, it's about 4,000 calories in a little bowl, just.
Sure. Well, another side story from my days in nutrition is the area that we were in central Wisconsin was known to have just about all the colored breeds available. So we had Brown Swiss and Jersey and Guernsey and Red Holstein, and we even had Milking Shorthorn, and I think did I mention Jersey? So we had them all. So the neat thing to do, if you knew how to do it, was after milking and you made your presentation and you got all your nutrition stuff done, you'd open up the lid to the milk tank, and guess what was in there?
A frog. I don't know.
No, it was yellow milk. Well, people don't know that the cream content of the fat content of the milk, the natural way the cows gave the milk of all those colored breeds, was so high that when you looked in the milk tank, instead of seeing white milk, it had a yellowish consistency to it. And of course, all the creameries, they just absolutely loved that because it was such a high percentage. It gave them a higher cheese content of milk.
Oh, the fattening foods I used to love. I do still love them. I just don't get to enjoy them like I once did.
We always tried to get that ice cream, that milk for when we made homemade ice cream. Oh, that made the best homemade ice cream is using that high fat milk.
Yeah. And what is heavy cream? Is that just real milk?
Yes.
Without dilute?
That's the yellow part of the milk, yes. Wonderful stuff.
Yeah. My father grew up in the Depression. But he always said, we always had plenty to eat. Even though we had no money and no nothing. I said, how's that? He said, because whenever I would ask for seconds, my parents would tell me, you've had plenty.
That's right. Maybe they didn't have gunk back then. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But, it is those hard times, unfortunately, that build character and build strength and build discipline. I just had a conversation the other day with somebody because, we were talking about coaching and motivation, and you've been in a sales environment. Everybody wants to get motivated, and I'm not anti-motivation. Obviously, that motivation's good, but it's discipline, Terry. That gets us through, because discipline can be relied upon. It's not a feeling; it's a discipline. We're told in the Bible to make disciples. So isn't it odd that the root word disciple and discipline, it goes back to the same root, and it's something that we need to nurture. It doesn't exactly come naturally. When you see somebody as a PhD, they've got a doctorate in a certain discipline and blah, blah, blah. But we always think of discipline as punishment, and that's unfortunate. Do you know the difference between discipline and punishment?
What's that?
Well, it's used synonymously in our culture, but think of this. Have you ever heard the remark, that's a well-punished child?
Ah, there you go.
So,
No, I haven't that because they
right.
always say well disciplined or
Right.
well
You would
behaved.
say, yeah, I would say well
Well,
disciplined as opposed to well punished. Punishment is always negative. But well, it I say negative. The purpose of punishment should be correction, shouldn't it?
well, when my dad and my mom corrected us kids, they used the patriotic method, where they corrected us, and we saw this. We They applied the stripes, and we saw the stars.
Oh,
That's what it
okay.
was.
Okay, patriotic. Well, Terry, it's always good sharing stories with you, and it's really great to have you back here at pjnet.tv. And I just I'm somewhat. I think anybody would be envious of a situation that you can spend. I say spend, invest
Yes,
is the better word. Invest so much time, with your grandchildren, and it's an example I think we all could benefit from, and we appreciate you, sharing with us tonight. And come back anytime, and when you got a good story.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it, Terry Palmer here on PJ Net. There it comes. Things have been kind of weird here in the studio tonight, if you haven't noticed. I apologize for the shaky start. By the way, that was entirely my fault. I neglected to do something in setting up, and I ended up setting it up, wrong. So, always good to hear from old Papa, Terry Palmer, here on pjnet.tv, where we provide a platform for everyday Christians to share their walk with Christ. That's our purpose, and I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be able to sit in this place. And I was just counting the other day. I think we had our 254th first time guest up here earlier this week. Wow. We've come a long ways, but we do have a long way to go. There are so many things that God has in store and we want to do, and I can't wait to announce some of that. We're getting close to making an announcement, probably first next week sometime, working around the clock on it. So we'll do this again tomorrow night. I hope you'll make plans to be here, and you can always go to pjnet.tv, our website, and there's a button there called Schedule, and you can see who is going to appear when. And thanks again, shout out to Barbara, our producer, who gets guests to appear. Remember the day, Barbara, and some of you that have been around, when we had trouble booking guests? We had 2 programs per week. 2 per week. And now in most cases, 2 per night, Monday through Thursday. All right, well, that will wrap it up for me. I'll leave you with these 2 questions, and together they form a challenge. Here they go. Here we go. Question number 1. What is the boldest thing you've ever done for Jesus Christ? Question number 2. How long ago was that? The challenge is to never be satisfied with either answer.